Well, good morning or afternoon, everyone. I'm Barry Mattson in Raleigh, North Carolina, and on March 16th, I was honored to join Rise Against Hunger as the new CEO. So thanks so much for being a part of our work and supporting our mission. Thank you for being thought partners with us and financial supporters, and for taking the time out of your busy days for this update. We're aware that you may have questions about how coronavirus has impacted Rise Against Hunger and our mission, and I'm going to be joined by two of my colleagues to discuss those topics today. But I want to share with you a little bit about my background before we dive in. So I've spent some time in the military with the combat deployment in the United States Air Force and one in the US Army. I've also had some experience in international agribusiness in the private sector and international development, particularly sustainable agriculture programs in East Africa and the Middle East. And most recently, I spent the last 6 years stateside at an amazing organization called The Mission Continues, where I was working with military veterans to continue service here at home. And then I joined Rise Against Hunger on March 16th, and this has been an amazing journey over the last month and a half, ideating, innovating, and adapting during this pandemic. And since the CDC released guidelines about restrictions on mass gatherings, many of our meal packaging events have since been canceled or postponed due to those stay-at-home policies. And approximately 60% of Rise Against Hunger meals are distributed through school feeding programs to nearly 500,000 children in vulnerable communities. The effects of COVID-19 on these children are dire because for many of them, a school meal is the only nutritious meal that they receive that day. So an interruption in the distribution of school meals really impacts their nutrition and their ability to learn. However, in nearly all of our locations, Rise Against Hunger is now classified under essential services due to the increasing need for food in this critical time. So we're still shipping meals, medical supplies, and other forms of emergency relief, both globally and domestically. Our dedicated teams here are putting themselves in harm's way to minimize the hardship on our beneficiaries as food security becomes a much larger issue. And with many of those living in hunger, dependent on informal economies, we've witnessed COVID-19 effects push families back over the brink into poverty. And we estimate that over 1 billion people worldwide are now experiencing hunger in some way. So we're committed to working with our partners to provide a safety net to combat these effects. At the same time that we're addressing this crisis, Rise Against Hunger is also continuing to work through local leaders in communities worldwide to develop sustainable livelihood programs for the long term. Our usual support during this farming season has also been affected, so we're innovating new ways to help farmers. And these solutions take different shapes in different cultures and contexts, but Rise Against Hunger's resilient network of local leaders are innovating sustainable solutions to hunger. And through our Empower Communities through Sustainable Agriculture portfolio, we will ensure continued implementation of multifaceted agricultural development projects to build the capacity of farmers and increase their food production for resilience to economic shocks. We'll talk about 4 projects in Malawi, Mali, Senegal, and Zimbabwe today, where we empower farmers through training. And we know that achieving our audacious goal of ending hunger by 2030 can't be done by one organization alone. It can't be done through donations alone, although they're extremely helpful, and it can't be done from the United States alone. But we can, however, as a global organization, bring best practices from around the world, together with lessons learned in our case studies, and local leaders decide what will work based on the strengths and needs of their specific communities. We also have a robust monitoring and evaluation capability to ensure our efficiency of our impact. And as a global organization, Rise Against Hunger continually applies adaptive management principles. We're constantly questioning our operating assumptions so that we can achieve the greatest impact. And then we examine those learnings to ensure that we're contributing to a sense of agency rather than dependency in local communities. So we have a strong presence on the ground in 6 countries, while in many others we work through local NGOs that meet our high standards of quality and impact. And as we hone our pathways to end hunger, our theory of change, and our roadmap, we encounter this classic business case of integrating several different stovepipe solutions to develop one integrated, adaptive, and cohesive solution. We hear this buzzword of collaboration all the time. I'm sure that you do too, and it's perpetuated in global conferences and publications, but we have to ensure that it's actually put into action. So our global team at Rise Against Hunger, our network of impact partners, and you, our dedicated donor base, give us many tools in our global reach to end hunger. And the potential is enormous for all of these entities to row in the same direction toward our theory of change in areas that we know to be impactful. We have several locations worldwide in which we've begun by meeting the immediate need through our packaged meals. And then we work with communities on sustainable development projects. And in turn, we've graduated many of these communities to no longer want nor need to accept packaged meals. And we think these are great success stories. It's our proof of concept that our empowering communities is a vital pathway to ending hunger. So the next step is to rapidly scale those empowering communities portfolios, and then they can be self-scaled from community to community through a trainer of trainers approach, focus on strength-based development, and have a reach back to our schoolhouse for emergent and best practices, lessons learned. So as many other NGOs understandably are shuttering their windows, and often for necessary reasons, Rise Against Hunger is committed to remain in this fight together with you and our partners. So we're going to lean in to this storm and work with our corporate partners, faith-based institutions, Global Confederation members, and our impact partners to send the message that we are still working. We're working in new ways, in safe ways, and working harder than ever to solve hunger in this time of crisis while maintaining our focus on future opportunities. So we want to talk to you today about the impact that this has had on our beneficiaries and our approach to support them, as well as share some ways that you can engage during this time with our mission to end hunger. Also, I want to invite you to please submit any questions that you have through the GoToMeeting chat box, and we'll be answering some of them toward the end of the call. So with that, I would love to welcome Edna Agwangi, our Chief Impact Officer at Rise Against Hunger, to discuss further. Hi, Edna. How are you?
I'm doing good. How are you, Barry? And hi, everyone who is on the call today.
Doing well. Thanks for joining. And you know, I want to just highlight and say how appreciative I am of your team and the work that you've been doing in global impact. Would you be willing to share some of our results from 2019?
Absolutely. Thank you, Barry. You know, 2019 was a very successful year for Rise Against Hunger and for the donors who support us, and as well the beneficiaries who really we serve, who are really the people we look forward to serving every single year. In 2019 by itself, we had almost 1.8 million people that we served, and this is through providing food that we really package with our volunteers, also providing agricultural tools and technologies and providing capacity on the ground for sustainable programming. And this has been really, really an exciting year for us in 2019. I want to just send a shout out to all the donors who are listening, because through you all, you provided the financial resources, but also the volunteers who are engaged in this mission of ending hunger, and also who are dedicated to help us move the needle of reducing food insecurity in the pockets we work with. We actually packaged over 77 million meals last year, and that was exciting for us to move that needle of making sure. For those who are aware or not even aware, our niche area of support in the food aid and distribution is school feeding. And this is an area where we are passionate about. It's transformational. Every kid who gets a meal, we know that they're getting education. They will be able to transform their lives in the near future. And we only hope that someday that kid will be a president in a country, or that kid will be able to bring solutions to maybe the COVID issues that we have, COVID-19 and all the viruses we have. So it's a transformational programming we have. But I want to highlight that we also helped almost 33,000 people in country to be more food secure. That means they may no longer need our meals anymore. And that's really critical to us.
Yeah, so you mentioned COVID-19. How has that affected how we're getting our meals to our beneficiaries? And what's the plan for any pipeline break that we might experience?
Absolutely, that's really important. Even before COVID-19, food security trends indicated that hunger and food insecurity around the world was a big concern. Now that with COVID-19 coming and the pandemic really attacking all the countries that we work in, it's something that Rise Against Hunger took near and dear for everyone to hear and understand what those stress levels will be. But there's always solutions. In any international context, we have to have a plan B. And experience has always taught us that because the international development space is very complex, we've seen our beneficiaries, our partners locally, starting to become very nimble and adaptive in the way we operate. We must, and also develop multi-pronged approaches in the way we bring those solutions. And this is an area I wanted to share with our donors who are listening. The Rise Against Hunger went very quickly and swiftly moved to actually having a plan on how we can be A, more resilient, but B, adaptive to respond to the COVID-19 pandemic. And in that case, we were able to develop three-pronged approaches. One, we took where we had, for all those who know, we package our meals every single day. 265, actually 365 days, I would say. We don't settle in. But because COVID-19 hit and we were not able to do the basic of what we do every single day, we were able to just make sure that the meals that we had in our warehouses and the extra surplus of rice that we had already purchased to do meal distribution had a home. So our first approach was to distribute that commodities. We did that internationally with the programs and impact partners we have, but we were also very adaptive to respond it domestically here in the US. We know that has affected a lot of our fellow citizens in America, and we wanted to respond that. The second thing we looked at up to on how we can approach is to work with small grants and issue grants to these local partners. And this is why before we actually send our meals, there was a lot of lockdown. If you are in any state here, we are now lifting the lockdown. There were also lockdowns in overseas. So we were able to be quickly and swiftly do things that we can purchase local products on the ground, issue grants so that we can save time and save livelihoods. And thirdly, as Barry, you mentioned a while ago, our communities are really the backbone of agriculture, food security in developing countries, and that's really an area we are passionate about. We are continuing to empower these communities, work with those local leaders, make sure they're adaptive, they're adjusting, and they're continuing to help the smallholder farmers.
Yeah, and we're sure appreciative of all of the donors, even on this call, who have stepped up to help us to distribute some of those bulk commodities and to do local procurement. I'd love to dig into the third one you mentioned. So how has COVID-19 adjusted our work on sustainable development projects? And maybe you can talk a little bit about what we're doing in Senegal.
Absolutely. While there's no doubt that COVID-19 has brought a lot of disruption, and it's brought that in all countries we serve in, and at Rise Against Hunger, we serve in about 36 countries. And 4 of the countries that we work with go deeper with agriculture development, and we had to really go deep and understand how we can be flexible, but also be able to continue working with our smallholder farmers, keeping in mind they are the backbone of every food and agriculture value chain in those countries. So due to the stringent host government restrictions, they all had social isolation precautions, no gatherings, no farmer trainings, making sure that even if the farmers had to produce food, the markets were closed. So practically everything was done on a shutdown mode. However, the success story here, and that's the beauty of development, the farmers we work with are so risk averse and they are able to think through beyond where we can look things that have hurdles. The Senegal project, Barry, that you mentioned is an interesting one because we work with partners and local leaders on the ground. They grow what we call high value crops, and these are perishable crops, vegetables and fruits. And these commodities serve a very vulnerable population, mostly people living with HIV/AIDS, but also people who live in who are sick in the hospitals. Now, when the shutdown happened, there needed to be a way to distribute these commodities. And the partners, local partners on the ground, the farmers created a way that they had more funds thanks to technology, and that's where it comes handy. They posted their funds on the posts, the farms, left the numbers, and they said, hey, if you need any vegetables, we are around. Surprisingly, because the government had shut down the entire market, our program was the only program that was able to distribute these meals to the hospitals and to also sell the commodities. Two wins here. The farmers were able to get income. Two, food wasn't being wasted. And to us, that's really a classic and intended positive impact of what we are seeing. The farmers are being innovative in everything that they do. Going forward, these are the things and best practices we want to share. How can we connect technology to agriculture so that farmers can utilize those tools to not only just using it for communication, but for farming market access? And that's going to take us to the next level.
That's a great example in Senegal, how they're responding, the farmers are responding in the near-term crisis, but also keeping an eye on the long-term opportunities for sustainable development. How many other countries where we serve are currently locked down?
Surprisingly, all our 36 countries have a measure of safety and lockdown, either shelter in place, social distancing, and to make things really complicated, most of these countries are countries where we have school feeding programs. With the lockdown, that means our kids who get our meals every single day no longer get that meal. However, we worked with our partners in a way that they are able to take home rations. And this is another adaptive measure that we are taking, and which is really helping us. While we know kids are not going to school, we've played a role in where we can work with our impact partners that our meals or whatever they have can be distributed to the kids. Now, it adds on the number of beneficiaries. Traditionally, it's this one kid who comes to school, has a meal. But because it's impacting the entire household, we are able to shift the mode of what we are doing to make sure we are catering not only the one student, but catering the entire family. And this is the beauty of just being agile and being adaptable as an organization to just say, how can we make communities to be food secure during this time of pandemic?
Yeah, you mentioned the beneficiaries that are affected by the meal shortages. I think we're foreseeing something around, I think you said 2.5 million people who could be affected. So what precautions are we taking and our impact partners in countries taking to ensure the safety of the meals and the beneficiaries?
That's a great question. People always ask if COVID-19 is really contagious and it's spreading around, how is it going to affect us? First of all, you mentioned about that 2.5 million people. And this is because we are including the households. For that, it takes us to the next level. With the meals that we always distribute, we always train the teachers and the cooks in schools how to prepare our meals. Now with COVID-19 and the meals, we know from the studies and also what we are aware from the CDC that food really is not a contaminant of COVID-19. However, the surface itself, whether it's a carton box or the floor, the virus could stay 2 to 3 days. But we know once you get the food and you cook it up to more than 70 degrees Celsius, the food will not be able to be contaminated. I must say that personally, I'm a native from Kenya. And when this information came that you have to really cook your food, the developing countries where we serve, and Kenya is one of the countries that I come from, I don't think there'll be an issue for us to get the partners, the beneficiaries to cook that food, because the food in these countries is really overcooked. And we are eager to just make sure we are transforming and also educating. Our nutritionist in-house has given us information and data on how to prepare the food, but also on how to do hygiene practices that can help us not to have any contamination in either food or even personal contamination for social distancing.
Well, thanks so much, Edna, for all the hard work that you and your team are putting into this. And thanks for joining me to discuss the COVID-19 beneficiary impact. And now we're going to shift the conversation to the meal packaging impact and support opportunities, but Edna will join us again a little bit later. So the empowering communities through sustainable ag projects that she just spoke about, they will help us move the needle on hunger in the long term, but we do recognize that there are many immediate needs during this crisis where people are just hungry. So I'd like to introduce Rick Kearney, our Chief Logistics and Engagement Officer, to talk about what our stateside teams are working on.
Hi, Barry.
Hi, Rick.
Good to be with everyone today.
Yeah, thanks for joining. So can you give us an update on our current status of events?
Sure. As most of you surely know, there have been limitations and restrictions applied through the CDC and local and federal governments in the United States regarding gatherings and other activities. Barry did mention we are considered an essential service provider, so we do have a little latitude there. But nonetheless, we have had a considerable number of events that have been canceled or postponed. Over 100 have canceled, and nearly 500 have postponed. So Edna and Barry, just a few minutes ago, talked about the interruption of our pipeline. That sort of puts a number to it, quantifies that nearly 13 million meals have either been postponed or canceled. So that's a significant amount of impact that wasn't taking place. So we had to really stop and think, what do we do in this interim? What do we do during this interruption? So our teams have been busy at work. They have had some very creative ideas on contacting and continuing to engage volunteers, asking for assistance through fundraising, but also looking at our core function of meal packaging and say, how can we do that now in this time while still complying with the standards for safety, not only for the food safety, but also for the safety and of the volunteers and staff. So we've had a team that's been working over the past couple of weeks to look at what does a meal packaging experience look like for 10 or less people. So setting up some different scenarios and modeling of packaging processes for 9 volunteers and 1 staff person. We've been looking at how many meals can be produced in an hour or a 2 hours or 3 hour shift. How much space does it take? What is the experience like? Because I know very many of the people on this call have been exposed to the good things like our meal packaging experience. And they know that it's an outburst of energy and excitement and enthusiasm and just joy that abounds throughout the 2 hours of the experience. So we're trying to see, how do we replicate that? How do we continue to provide that same excitement and joy of what the volunteers are experiencing when you're doing it with 9 people that are at least 6 feet apart? So there's some challenges there. We want to still provide a quality opportunity for the volunteers, but honestly, right now, our primary focus is on making sure that we get as many meals as we can to those beneficiaries that Edna described. So we are working through that. Many of our our partners we've talked to on the packaging side that also have a desire to do what they can right now. Some of the folks on this call perhaps are already in discussion with us. What can we do now? How can we contribute? Because they understand that the virus may have struck our communities, but hunger never left those same communities. And even now, the experience and the need of our beneficiaries is even greater. So the good news is, within the safety guidelines and within the recommendations of the CDC and WHO, we are going to look at ways that we can begin to package meals. We have always had strong safety and quality requirements for the food and for our packaging volunteers. Our hygiene practices are always very solid and consistent, and we've even added to that as we've looked at these new models during this time of change, by adding masks, by adding additional sanitation techniques to equipment, by providing even more hand gel and wipes. So really looking at how do we take very solid hygiene practices and make them even stronger, because we want people to be safe and also comfortable when they come in, that all they have to think about is the impact they're making on our beneficiaries. They don't have to be concerned about contamination of themselves or the food that they're working with. So we're just really excited about what opportunities are coming in the next few days and weeks.
Absolutely, and thanks for your team innovating and doing that test last week on how to do this safely. It's super important for us. You mentioned how many meal packaging events have been canceled and postponed, but what does that mean in terms of meals and food for our beneficiaries?
Well, so that's out of the canceled events, that would have totaled 2.5 million meals. The postponed and rescheduled events is 10.1 million meals. So that's almost over 40 containers of food that we are not currently able to provide. That would be that interruption that Edna mentioned, that allowed us to think of what are alternative ways. That she mentioned the 3 initiatives that we'll be working through. So we're excited. I mean, we think that's a lot of meals that we're not packaging right now. The positive side of that is majority of those are with our donors and hosts whose full desire is to reschedule, that they do want to do this when it's safe for their volunteers, when we can actually get back to work that they desperately want to help continue to support us with. So trying to find the upside is, we're excited to be contacting a lot of people on this call and other organizational hosts. Let's talk about that reschedule as restrictions are lifted, but also while in place with the methods that we're developing to go ahead and get back to work to serve these people around the world.
Right. And you mentioned around the world, we have 6 locations, including the US, where we have offices. And, you know, you and I, Rick, have been on regular calls with each of them in India, Malaysia, the Philippines, South Africa, and Italy. And it's really interesting to compare notes. I know it's a different situation and scenario in each of those countries where we're packaging and different levels of lockdown, but even hearing the restrictions on movement from island to island in the Philippines, the large informal economy that so many people are dependent on in India, and then the ways that in South Africa they're getting back into meal packaging, and we've compared notes on how they're socially distancing and doing those things as well. It's been really fascinating to see this global team come together. So what else can our partners on the call do to get involved and support Rise Against Hunger's beneficiaries at this time? And I know we've got some virtual engagement opportunities out there like this one, some more coming up. What do we currently have in the plans?
Yeah, the big thing coming up that we're really excited about is Rise Against Hunger goes live, and it'll be on Giving Tuesday next week on May 5th, which has been identified as another global day of giving that many of us are used to hearing about and participating in the fall. But right now, we're going to be hosting Rise Against Hunger goes live from 12 to 5 Eastern time next Tuesday. It will be a virtual event. It'll be full, just jam-packed with some visuals of the new packaging process involving smaller number of people with the social distance applied. There'll be some fun segments. We'll have some of our staff will demonstrate some recipes and how you can cook our meals to make them perhaps even more delicious to our palates, as well as to those around the world. So there's just a lot of opportunities, Barry. We hope a lot of folks here will tune in between noon and 5 next Tuesday, May 5th. I think there'll be some communication from some of our staff out to the folks on the call and some of the other our donors and packaging hosts so they can participate. So be looking for your invitation real soon to Rise Against Hunger goes live on Giving Tuesday, May 5th.
Yeah, riseagainsthunger.org/live is a good place to find that. Additionally, we're doing Go the Social Distance. What is that all about?
Right. Go the Social Distance. We have a lot of young, athletic, very fit-minded people at Rise Against Hunger, and some of them got together and said, we can still have a race. We'll do it one at a time or 6 feet apart, or it may be virtual, and that some may join in spirit like I'm going to do. But on May 15th through the 17th, we'll have the Go the Social Distance. It'll be a 5K, 10K. You can walk. I mean, you can run, you can sprint. I mean, depending on your level of accomplishment as a runner or a walker. So everyone can register. You can visit riseagainsthunger.org/race, or you can reach out to any contact at Rise Against Hunger that you may have worked with. And you can be involved. You can be a racer, you can be a supporter, you can be a sponsor, you can build a team. We've had some folks who have built teams here at Rise Against Hunger, and some family and friends. So it's a real good opportunity to engage when you can't necessarily be together. So we're really excited about that virtual race that's going to take place in May as well.
Yep. And additionally, Edna mentioned the 3-step COVID-19 relief and resilience plan that we discussed earlier, and you can also support that financially. You can find more details on that plan at riseagainsthunger.org/COVID-19. So that's a good segue to invite Edna back on the call, and we will be taking your questions. Let's see. If you have any questions, feel free to type them in the chat box there. We can all see them, and we'd be happy to answer them.
Barry, while we're waiting for the other questions, one question had been posed to me, like in time when meal packaging is a little more difficult and doesn't involve as many people, some of our host organizations have said, how can our staff help you in other ways? And one way that is extremely valuable to us is in skill-based volunteering. Over the years, we have had tremendous growth and improvements in our organization with skill-based volunteering. In my time, I remember some specifics with an organization that resourced us with not only some additional knowledge and skills, but with some process improvements. In a 2-year period for our international meal packaging, we went from a $200,000 loss to a $120,000 profit. And as Edna knows here, profit with us means more impact on more people. So that's a very specific example. We've had lots of our improvements can be attributed to our skills-based volunteering projects with our donors and sponsors. We've made supply chain improvements. We've had individual giving improvements. We've been assisted with data-driven decisions around improving our budgeting process. So I could just go on and on and on. So I really hope that there's some folks listening here who goes, I think I have something to offer. And even if it's one of the topics I just mentioned, we can get better again. So we always think there's always opportunity to learn, change, and be better. So we really invite people to get contact with us and get in touch with us if you have some staff or teams that feel like they could add an additional resource to us. We would greatly, greatly appreciate that.
That's great. We do appreciate that. I want to put out one more call for questions. If anyone has any, feel free. But if not, we can wrap up here. I want to give you guys a chance to weigh in if you have any other questions. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us and for your continued support. It means so much to us, especially in a time of global uncertainty. Your Rise Against Hunger contact will be reaching out with a recording of today's discussion, as well as an invite to Rise Against Hunger Goes Live as part of Giving Tuesday Now, and for the race, and additional ways to get involved and support our 3-step COVID-19 relief and resilience plan. I just want to say personally, thank you to each of you for what you do for Rise Against Hunger, and thank you for who you are, your talent, your commitment, your leadership, your sacrifice during this time. Thanks for your decision to serve with us. And thanks for all those people that you will continue to lead. I'm awfully proud to be in this business with you, and I look forward to meeting you in person at a later date. Stay safe and healthy.